Julia and her friends gathered in a cozy student apartment in São Paulo, the city's nightlights shimmering through the windows as they huddled close, laughter drifting around the small living room. The table was cluttered with take-out boxes and half-empty soda cans, and chatter bounced between old memories and silly jokes. Lucas, always the one to bring something new to the group, grinned as he held up a curious little kit. He explained it was a DNA test he had spotted at the pharmacy, and he thought it would be hilarious to see where everyone's roots really came from. He promised it would be just for fun, a quick break from studying and exams, and maybe a chance to find out who might be related to a samba dancer or a football legend. Everyone laughed and shrugged, agreeing that it sounded like a funny little adventure. When the kits were passed around, jokes flew about what they might discover. Maybe one of them had a surprise Italian uncle or some distant Japanese ancestry. But when Julia got her collection tube, she hesitated for a moment. Her family had always said their story was simple. Generations growing up around Minas Gerais, stories told over big Sunday lunches. She never thought twice about it. Her background felt solid, rooted in so many family traditions. But now, holding the small tube, she realized just how little she actually knew. After they mailed off the test kits, something shifted in the group's dynamic. Almost every day, someone brought up wild guesses about their ancestry. Raphael was the one who really dove into it. He started imagining all sorts of unusual roots, maybe a Viking ancestor or a lost connection to African royalty. Sophia, on the other hand, got a little more sentimental, hoping to find even a distant link to faraway places like Italy or Japan, just to make her family stories a little more exciting. Their predictions sparked lively debates around the dinner table, and checking email updates became a group ritual. Even the most skeptical of them ended up joining in, teasing each other over new theories with growing excitement. For Julia, though, it all felt a bit distant. She played along with their speculation, smiling in the right places, but deep down she was sure none of it applied to her. Her family had always been so clear about their Brazilian heritage, so rooted in the countryside traditions of Minas Gerais, that this test felt more like a boring chore than an adventure. She figured the results would only confirm what she already knew. Never once did it cross her mind that she might be in for a shock, that the answer in that little online report could throw her whole world upside down. When the email with the results finally lands in her inbox, Julia is expecting to see the typical charts and percentages everyone joked about. Instead, her screen lights up with a warning in bold red letters, saying her account has been locked and that she needs to contact the legal department of GeneLink Brazil. For a second, she can hardly move. Her hand hovers above the mouse, her heart pounding faster while questions start spinning in her mind. What could possibly be so wrong that a genetics company needs their legal team involved? Fear creeps in slowly, making it hard to breathe as she tries to figure out if this is some kind of mistake. She reaches for her phone and calls Sophia, who had already received a very standard report filled with family trees and maps. But Sophia is just as confused and can only listen as Julia stumbles through the half-explained problem. The call ends without real answers, leaving Julia even more isolated. The sounds of São Paulo, usually a comfort in the background, disappear into heavy silence. Every creak in the apartment makes her jumpy and restless. That night, lying awake in the dark, she realizes she is facing something bigger and scarier than she ever expected, something that might change everything she thought she knew about her own life. Julia cannot bring herself to tell her parents what happened, afraid they might worry or get angry over something she barely understands. Instead, she confides only in Sophia, hoping a friend's support will make things feel less overwhelming. Sophia, always ready to help, insists on coming along when Julia decides to visit the GeneLink Brazil headquarters in Rio de Janeiro, the only place listed in the strange email. The two of them pack light and board an early morning train, the city gradually giving way to endless fields and busy little towns. Their conversation bounces from nervous jokes to serious what-ifs. But beneath every word is the hope that all of this will turn out to be a simple system glitch. Julia watches the scenery blur past the windows, her stomach churning as every stop brings them closer to answers she might not be ready to hear. Sophia does her best to keep Julia distracted, pointing out boats along the river and families getting off at smaller stations. But the feeling of dread only grows stronger. By the time the train slows near Rio, Julia can hardly remember a time when she was not this anxious. Even the warm sunshine outside the train seems a little too bright, as if everything familiar has been left behind, and they are about to step into a whole new reality. At the front desk of Gene Link Brazil, everything feels a bit too polished. There is an icy air in the waiting area, and the receptionist, Mariana, greets them with a tight smile that does little to steady Julia's racing heart. Sophia stays close, squeezing Julia's hand now and then, whispering small encouragements that do not quite stick. The wait drags, every minute making Julia's nerves worse. At last, her name is called, and she has to let go of Sophia, glancing back as if trying to borrow some of her friend's calmness. That silent exchange, just a look, says everything about how much Julia wishes she was not walking into that room alone. Inside, the space is all glass and sharp lines, and across the table sits Dr. Sergio, a lawyer with kind eyes but a serious tone. He slides over a thick folder, opening it gently to reveal official papers and a handful of photographs. Julia tries to follow what he is saying, but her mind catches only fragments. DNA analysis, a long-missing woman named Gabriela Martinez, undeniable biological matches. Piece by piece, the story falls into place. Julia is not who she thought she was. She is the daughter of a stranger, a woman her own family has never even mentioned, missing since the late 1980s. It feels as if the world just shifted underneath her, leaving her stranded and breathless. Julia listens, stunned, as Dr. Sergio explains how she was caught in a baby-swapping scheme that happened back in the late 1980s. The whole thing, they say, may have been organized by Dr. Paulo Henriquez, the former head of obstetrics at the big public hospital in Belo Horizonte. Julia's mind drifts as she tries to process each word. It all seems too wild to be true. Still, when Sergio slides an envelope across the table, her hands shake as she opens it. Inside, she finds fragile pieces of the hidden story, an old birth certificate, faded with time, where her own name, Julia da Silva, has been crossed out and replaced with another, Clara Martinez. The weight of it hits all at once. Julia is left staring at the proof that every moment, every holiday and family photo has been built on something false. There is a heavy ache in her chest, a sense of betrayal so sharp it almost brings tears. She tries to hold herself together, not wanting to break down in front of this stranger with all her secrets spread out on the table. For the first time, she wonders if the family she has always called her own ever really belonged to her at all, or if everything she thought she knew was just part of a story made up to cover the truth. Back in her small apartment in Sao Paulo, Julia cannot focus on anything but her questions. She pulls out her laptop and starts searching for information about Gabriela Martinez, Dr. Paulo Henriquez, and that hospital where she was born. The more she finds, the more everything she thought she knew slips through her fingers. There are news stories from old Brazilian newspapers and grainy black and white photographs of doctors in crisp white coats standing in front of the hospital entrance. She reads about missing babies, families that never stopped searching, and cases that filled courtrooms in the 1990s but never really brought answers. Every detail stacks up, widening the gap between the life she grew up with and this new, hard truth she cannot look away from. What really shakes her is the discovery that dozens of other children, like her, had their lives uprooted under Dr. Paulo's watch. Many were officially reported as stillborn or quietly listed as adopted, their names erased and rewritten, their families left behind in confusion and grief. Julia realizes, sitting there alone in the flickering light of her computer, that she is not just unraveling her own story. She is part of a much bigger tragedy, a web of pain bigger than she could have imagined. Her search for answers now feels like a mission not just for herself, but for all those who never had the chance to find where they really belong. Feeling overwhelmed and needing real answers, Julia thinks of her old friend Rodrigo from university. Back then, Rodrigo was always digging into health scandals for their anthropology class, and he never let a mystery go unsolved. Julia calls him late in the evening, her words tumbling out before she even has time to organize her thoughts. Rodrigo listens carefully, asking questions, not rushing her or doubting her strange story. Right away, he offers his help, promising to dig into news archives and track down old hospital records from Belo Horizonte in the late 1990s, hoping to find some lead that could make sense of everything. A few days drag by, each one dotted with messages from Rodrigo about what he is finding, some dead ends, a couple of odd rumors, but nothing solid at first. Then, one night, he calls Julia with excitement in his voice. Rodrigo explains he has found the name of Teresa Souza, a nurse who once worked at the hospital and supposedly tried to expose Dr. Paulo's secret activities before she vanished from public records. The possibility of talking to someone who might have actually been there the day Julia was born sparks a new hope in her. Suddenly, all the tired frustration shifts to determination, and Julia feels herself waking up again, ready to fight for the truth, no matter how hard it might be to face. With Rodrigo by her side, Julia sets out to find Teresa Souza in a quiet, aging neighborhood on the southern edge of São Paulo. The old apartment buildings line narrow streets, laundry hanging from balconies, and the sounds of children playing somewhere nearby. After a few hesitant knocks, an elderly woman with gentle eyes and silver hair opens the door. Rodrigo introduces them, explaining why they have come. Teresa listens, her hands resting quietly in her lap, then studies Julia's face for a long moment. At last, she nods and says softly that she used to work as a maternity nurse at the hospital decades ago. When Julia mentions her birthday and a faded scar behind her left ear, Teresa's eyes fill with tears. She remembers holding a baby with just that mark, the day Julia was born. The truth comes out slowly, weighed down with emotion. Teresa explains how Gabriela Martinez was told her child had died soon after birth. A doctor, in a hurry and acting strangely, pressured Gabriela to sign a death certificate she did not want to believe in. The hospital staff was ordered out of the way, and Gabriela was pushed from the building before she could even see her little girl. It is heartbreaking to hear, but for Julia, Teresa's story brings her the first, real, solid proof of what happened, a piece of her life she never knew she was missing. Holding on to the details Teresa has shared, Julia finds a new sense of purpose. Teresa gives her the name Ana Paula, someone who used to be close to Gabriela Martinez. Julia returns home feeling both nervous and hopeful, thinking that maybe she is finally getting closer to finding her birth mother. Unsure where to start, she writes a careful message to Lucas Almeida, a respected investigative journalist in Brazil, known for his work uncovering hospital crimes, especially the notorious baby-swapping cases that have haunted São Paulo for years. Julia is surprised when Lucas replies almost immediately. His message is kind and straightforward, explaining that he is actually familiar with the name Gabriela Martinez. He has spent years talking to families and tracing the missing children involved in similar stories. Lucas says that Julia's first-hand account, combined with the evidence she has collected, might be the missing link needed to expose what remains of one of Brazil's darkest medical scandals. He offers to set up a meeting, encouraging her to stay brave a little longer. For Julia, This is the first time in weeks that she feels she is not facing everything alone. With Lucas now on her side and leads pointing her toward Ana Paula, Julia starts to believe she can finally uncover the truth. Julia meets Lucas in his cramped office in central São Paulo, a place stuffed with shelves overflowing with folders and black and white photographs tacked to the walls. It feels more like a detective's lair than anything else, and Julia is a little overwhelmed by the sheer chaos. Lucas pulls out a thick file labeled Operation Semente, a case involving illegal adoptions that he has chased for years. He explains how Dr. Paulo orchestrated the whole network, quietly moving newborns from unsuspecting families and erasing their histories. As Lucas flips through reports, he points out Gabriela Martinez's case, a rare instance where the mother, instead of giving up or quietly grieving, fought back and tried to report the crime. Going through all the documents, Julia feels her stomach twist. Luis and Marisa da Silva, the people who raised her, had always seemed just like any other parents, but Lucas shows Julia copies of adoption paperwork that never made it through court and faded receipts from unknown third parties. He explains, gently, that Julia was handed over directly by someone working as a middleman. There was no judge, no paperwork legitimizing her arrival. For Julia, these facts shift her whole world yet again. Her childhood home, once steady and familiar, is now tangled up in questions as troubling as those about her birth family. Determined not to let her search lose momentum, Julia takes Ana Paula's tip and prepares to visit Curitiba, where Ana Paula now lives. It is a big step, but there is something Julia needs to do before leaving. One evening, after struggling with her thoughts, she sits down with Luis and Marisa at the dinner table. Her heart races as she lays out what she has discovered about the illegal adoption network, the missing court documents, and the middleman who brought her into their lives. She asks them to finally be honest, no matter how hard it might be. The conversation quickly turns heavy, the truth surfacing in sobs and long silences. Through tears, Marisa admits they had always known something was off, but were too desperate to become parents to dig deeper or say no. Luis adds that the fear of losing Julia made them hide the reality for so long. Their words are heartfelt but painful, and Julia feels crushed by the mix of emotions. The warmth and trust that once defined their home now feel tangled up with guilt, sorrow, and resentment. Though the love between them is still real, the distance created by years of secrets makes any forgiveness seem far away for now. Without another word, Julia packs her bag and heads out, more committed than ever to finding Gabriela and understanding where she truly comes from. Julia spends her first night in Curitiba, tucked away in a small hotel room, the hum of distant city traffic slipping through the window. Sleep will not come. Instead, she sits on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in her hand and letting her mind drift back to moments from childhood. Birthday parties with chocolate cake, lazy Sunday afternoons watching soccer games, and the way Marisa used to hug her tightly after a bad dream. Now, Julia cannot help but wonder if those memories are still real, or if every warm moment was colored by a lie. She tries to recall each detail, asking herself whether their love for her was pure, or if it was always shadowed by secrets. It makes her doubt even her own feelings, leaving her more lost than ever. Just when Julia thinks the weight of everything might crush her, her phone buzzes with a new message from Rodrigo. His words are simple but mean everything. He managed to find Ana Paula's current address and a way to reach her. Julia lets the hope grow inside her, even though it is tangled up with fear. The thought of finally meeting the woman who might be her real mother is both thrilling and terrifying. She worries Ana Paula will not want to see her, or that this final step will only leave her with more questions. But she knows she has to try. Early the next morning, Julia boards a bus heading deep into the green hills surrounding Curitiba. With each passing kilometer, the city noise fades, replaced by quiet farmland and mountains that seem to stretch forever. She stares out the window, feeling every part of her body weighed down by years of unanswered questions and secrets. For 24 years, her life has been shaped by stories she has only just begun to uncover. The simple houses and winding roads of the small village they reach seem out of place compared to the mess of her emotions. When Julia finally arrives, Ana Paula is waiting outside a modest house with faded pink walls. There is an easy kindness in Ana Paula's eyes that puts Julia at ease, even though her hands are shaking. They talk inside over strong coffee, and the atmosphere is gentle. The silence is not awkward but comforting. Ana Paula understands Julia's pain without needing any long explanations. Quietly, she takes an envelope from a drawer and gives Julia her original birth certificate. The name Gabriela Martins printed in careful handwriting. Ana Paula assures her that Gabriela is still alive, though she has chosen to live quietly, pushed into isolation by the heartache of losing her daughter so many years ago. With the birth certificate clutched tightly in her hand and Ana Paula walking by her side, Julia follows a narrow dirt path that winds up a steep grassy hill just beyond the village. The silence between them is both comforting and charged with anticipation. Though Julia's heart is racing, something about the quiet, open landscape calms her. Each step feels heavy with the weight of all the years she spent wondering and waiting, but it also feels like she is moving towards something real at last. At the top, a small white house stands against the sky, simple and a little worn, but inviting. Ana Paula gives Julia's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before stepping back to let her go on alone. Julia approaches the door, her hands shaking and her breath shallow. When the door opens, she finds herself face to face with Gabriela, her mother. For a long moment, neither of them speaks. They just look into each other's eyes, searching for family and for answers in each other's faces. Finally, Gabriela pulls Julia into a tight embrace. The hug is long and fierce, letting out years of pain and longing from both of them. Julia feels a wave of relief mixed with deep sadness and new hope. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet hills, she knows she has finally reached the place she was always meant to find, even if the journey was never easy. Inside the quiet living room, sunlight pours in through the windows, making the moment feel almost peaceful. Julia and Gabriela sit side by side on a worn-out couch, both unsure of where to begin. After a long pause, Gabriela reaches for Julia's hand and begins to tell her story. How she spent years searching, visiting police stations, talking to lawyers, and writing letters to anyone who would listen. Each time, she met only closed doors and disbelief from officials and even her own family. As Gabriela talks, her voice sometimes trembles, but she keeps going, explaining that it was only when the weight of pain and defeat became too much that she retreated to this small house on the hill. Isolation in the village at least let her grieve in peace, away from those who doubted her and the city that held too many painful memories. Julia listens closely, her tears falling silently. She cannot change what her mother went through, but sitting there, she promises Gabriela out loud that they will face what comes next together. They will not let others silence them again, and they will do all they can to make sure no one else has to suffer this kind of loss. With that promise, Julia feels the bond between them grow stronger. No longer just a feeling or a hope, but a real source of courage for everything ahead. The afternoon slips by while Julia and Gabriela talk, the walls between them coming down with every shared word. Just as Julia begins to feel the weight of the day lift a bit, her phone suddenly buzzes on the table. She answers to find Rodrigo on the other end, his voice excited and a bit breathless. He tells her that a man named Tomás, who used to drive for Carlos Moreira, the same lawyer who dealt with Julia's adoptive parents, has come forward. Tomas claims he remembers driving a newborn girl all the way from a clinic in São Paulo to a middleman named Felipe Costa, who acted as both a legal advisor for Julia's adoptive family and someone who fixed paperwork for illegal adoptions. The news brings both fear and relief to the room. Julia looks at Gabriela, who nods with resolve rather than hesitation. For the first time, they have a real witness and a clear path to exposing what happened all those years ago. Without much debate, Julia and Gabriela decide together that it is time to bring their story into the open and take it to court. They know it will be hard, that people might try to silence or discredit them, but the days of hiding and keeping secrets are finally over. Together, they are ready to fight, so that no other family has to lose as much as they did. Weeks later, Julia finds herself sitting in a crowded courtroom in downtown São Paulo, the air tense as lawyers shuffle papers and the judge calls the proceedings to order. She squeezes Gabriela's hand, drawing strength from her presence and the shared determination that brought them this far. One after another, witnesses are called. Laura, the nurse who first placed Julia in Gabriela's arms, stands up and tells the court exactly what she saw. Then Tomas, the former driver, steps forward. His testimony is clear and unwavering. He details the drive with the newborn and how he handed her over to Felipe Costa, the supposed legal advisor who is now under investigation. Each account chips away at Felipe's defense, leaving less room for denial or excuse. When the verdict finally comes, every word feels heavy with meaning. The judge declares Felipe guilty of human trafficking and document forgery. For a brief moment, Julia feels a rush of vindication, not just for herself and Gabriela, but for others who spent years feeling invisible and powerless. Still, she knows that no sentence, however just, can erase the pain or lost time. What gets her through are the people beside her, Rodrigo, Ana Paula, Laura, and others who stood by her side. Their solidarity brings light out of dark days and gives Julia a sense of hope she thought she had lost forever. When the tension of the trial finally fades and the dust settles, Julia doesn't hesitate long about her next step. She decides to stay in that quiet village outside Curitiba, where the mountains stand silent and steady, and every morning starts with strong coffee on the porch. There, she and Gabriela work side by side, fixing up the old house. They patch the roof, plant a small garden out back, and slowly fill the rooms with laughter and shared stories. The days are simple, but that's what makes the difference. Each moment helps them build something new together, piece by piece. As Julia settles in, she starts feeling like she really belongs, maybe for the first time in her life. She and Gabriela discover all the little things they have in common, like a love of music and a talent for burning toast. The more they learn about each other, the more the shadows of the past start to fade. Wanting to help others as she was helped, Julia writes an article about her story for a major Brazilian magazine. When it's published, she starts getting letters and emails from people across the country, many searching for their own lost families. Instead of holding her pain alone, Julia's experience becomes a spark, helping others find the courage to speak up and seek the truth. As the seasons shift and the hills around Curitiba glow gold in the late afternoon light, Julia decides to do something special for her mother. On a quiet Sunday, she leads Gabriela to their favorite spot on the hill just behind the house, where you can see the rooftops of the village and hear the distant sounds of life floating on the breeze. Julia smiles, her hands a little shaky, and opens a small box to show Gabriela a silver necklace. Curved on the tiny charm is Julia Alves, Julia's birth name, the identity that had been taken from her so many years ago. She gently clasps it around Gabriela's neck, promising they will never let life or circumstance pull them apart again. The moment is quiet, but it carries a weight both women feel deep down. For Julia, giving this gift is more than just a kind gesture. It is a way of bringing all her scattered pieces back together. Gabriella's face softens with tears and joy as she hugs her daughter, holding on tightly. A few months later, Julia is invited to speak at a major international conference about her journey. She stands on stage, Gabriella and her friends Rodrigo and Ana Paula all cheering her on from the crowd. With a steady voice, Julia tells everyone that searching for the truth is the bravest thing she has ever done, and the truest way she learned to love herself. Surrounded by those who helped her, she feels proud, not just of the justice they won, but because she finally feels whole.